All right, following up on the heels of Elder Holland's talk addressing the staff faculty of Brigham Young University earlier this week, I thought it would be important to also cover President Worthen's announcement about the new Office of Belonging, which will be put in place at Brigham Young University here shortly. For many of you, you see this as a big concern. I want to taper those concerns maybe a little bit and talk a little bit more about what we might expect here and a little bit about the development of this office, what it is supposed to be doing, what the suggestions are for it to do, and an evolution of where this idea started and where it has ended up, at least today. First of all, I want to open up with a quote from President Worthen. It says, "As a result of having our hearts knit together, the community is one where all relationships, not just the relationships with those with whom we agree, but all relationships reflect devout love of God and a loving, genuine concern for the welfare of our neighbor." That sounds good. That is good. That's an important thing. As many of you know, last year, President Worthen assigned a new committee called the Race, Equity, and Belonging Committee to come up with a report with findings about primarily race, which was kind of interesting. I didn't see much on there at all about, say, for example, women or sexual orientation as an example. This was almost primarily all about race and ethnicity. But that committee put together this report, which came out earlier this year. And that report had many suggestions to it. Some that look very good to me, and others that are a little bit concerning. First, I think the obvious thing to look at is the name of the office of Belonging. The name of the committee was the Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging. So it has been tapered down. The suggestion from the committee was that there would be an office set up called the Diversity and Belonging Office, or the Office of Diversity and Belonging. So that was tapered down. That, I think, is significant. I really do. I'm trying to be very open-minded to this. I think that there is a need for something like this on BYU's campus. It just all depends on how this is actually going to play out. The term belonging is still a social justice type of word, but it's not as politically charged. And that tells me that the school and probably the Board of Trustees did not want this to be as politically charged as what we usually find with DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion offices in other universities and large companies, for example, other institutions. So they want to set the stage here for everyone to understand that this is a little bit different. I think that's important. President Worthen goes on to say, "We determined that a necessary first step was to establish a framework within which and by which we would evaluate the various recommendations. The framework would not only provide guiding principles for evaluating the recommendations, these are the recommendations from the committee, and measuring our progress, but also set forth a vision of our end goal, what we hoped our campus community would become." Right? So far, so good. I think based on Elder Holland's talk, I don't think there's any doubt that this office was very specifically combed over by Elder Holland and the Board of Trustees. And I think, to me, they've done an excellent job on how they're going to launch this and what they're going to do. I don't know what my expectations there are. I have hopes that this is a positive thing, that it helps those that are marginalized, but that it doesn't become a political arm. That's the concern. But what President Worthen said is that this office is going to be guided by a statement or a mission statement, which is as follows. And again, very significant the way that this is written. The statement is this: "We are united by our common primary identity as children of God." Again, I have said this previously in other podcast episodes. This is where the church goes with this whole idea of identitarianism, of critical race theory and intersectionality. They don't want to delve into the minutia down below, into everybody's different background and ethnicity, etc. They want to bring the good from everyone, of course. But your primary identity is always as a child of God. And that can't change. And you'll notice in the talks from President Oakes, Elder Holland, President Nelson, they always mention this in conjunction whenever they're talking about anything that has to do with race. And so here it is right at the top. And here's the second point, which is really important. And our commitment to the truths of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. So, number one, we look at this office as being first and foremost as uniting us all as our primary identity as children of God. That's key. That principle right there is the number one fighter against a breakdown of, say, for example, critical race theory that wants to divvy us up based on the color of our skin and our backgrounds. And then secondly, our commitment to the truths of the restored gospel. So that's the chassis that all of this office is going to be hanging off of. That's very important. It continues. We strive to create a community of belonging composed of students, faculty, and staff whose hearts are knit together in love. This is based off of Mosiah 18:21. Where? And then we get 4 different bullet points here. Here's the first one. All relationships reflect devout love of God and a loving, genuine concern for the welfare of our neighbor. That's called charity. And that's crucial. That's important. We need more of that in the world. So that's good. Number 2, we value and embrace the variety of individual characteristics, life experiences, and circumstances, perspectives, talents, and gifts of each member of the community and the richness and strength they bring to our community. Great. It's like bringing together, as we talked about here, it's like the parable of the talents. Everybody has different talents. Let's bring them all together here. Third, our interactions create and support an environment of belonging. Absolutely. That does not mean that you have to change your standards, right? That is not calling for a change in standards. It's saying you put your arm out to people and you put your arm around people. And finally, number 4, the full realization of each student's divine potential is our central focus. So that's pretty powerful. That's really good stuff. That is the statement on belonging. That is basically the mission statement for the office of belonging. Now, here's the concern, right? With all that in place there, and I feel very, very good about it. I think it's a good thing. Honestly, I think this is better than not doing anything. I really do. The concern is where the committee was beforehand and with the suggestions that they have. The good sign here is that, as you'll see on some of these suggestions, they wanted something very different in their mission statement. Very, very different than what they got here on this statement of belonging. So that is very refreshing. The mission statement recommended by the Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging was fraught with critical race theory terms, other political organizations, and very, very little about the gospel of Jesus Christ. So great work on this. Now here, for example, are some of the suggestions that you get from the report that was submitted to President Worthen earlier this year. And there are many good things in here, right? Again, it's important that I'm doing something on this week. We've got to be able to parse these things out. We want change if it's good. What we don't want are different ideologies that are going to conflict with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the mission of BYU. So I'm not going to go over everything here, and admittedly, I'm going to just cover a few points here that are a little bit concerning to me in the suggestions on that report. There were 26 different suggestions broken up into 3 different areas. 1, institutional and organizational reforms. 2, student belonging and equity reforms. It's a very problematic word. And I'm glad to see that there was not that word, that diversity, equity, or inclusion, none of those three words were used in the mission statement on the Office of Belonging. And then thirdly, it's broken down into faculty reforms. So let's look at just a few of these suggestions here that the committee came up with. They wanted to create a central office of diversity and belonging. So they dropped equity. So you know there probably was some kind of an exchange there going on early on, maybe at just the administrative level at the school. And they're like, we're dropping equity. We're not putting that in here. Right? I mean, if you look at President Oak's quote saying, and I'm paraphrasing, the equality of God is the equality of opportunity, not the equality of results. Well, that's what equity is, right? The equality of results, which only comes about when you raise it up as the highest value, and therefore it has to be forced because we're not all the same. So equity was removed in their recommendation on the name for this new central office of diversity and belonging. And then diversity was dropped. So really the focus is on the one really only important positive attribute here. Diversity in itself is not a positive attribute. It can do positive things, but the end goal here is the belonging. So I think that I'm just guessing at the evolution on this, of this name. But it says that office will be charged with strategic planning and implementation of initiatives to assist students and employees with issues related to race, equity, again, got rid of that, and belonging. Okay. We'll see where that goes, what exactly the Office of Belonging is going to encompass and be charged with. They asked to create a new position of Vice President for Diversity and Belonging. Well, they're getting that. It'll be a Vice President of the Office of Belonging. We're going to hear about that down the road a little bit. Now, who is that person going to be? What kind of training are they going to have? Are they going to be with a strong background from a DEI office, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion office? Are they going to be bringing in strategies and vernacular language that is contrary to the mission statement of the Office of Belonging? I hope not. Okay, and then there's a few other points here which are all very positive to me as far as making everybody feel included and belonging here at the university, making a good environment for people. Here's another one that was a little bit of a concern for me. Develop and implement extensive diversity and inclusion training programs and resources for students, faculty, staff, and administrators. This training would be facilitated by the Office of Diversity and Belonging. Okay, again, where is this training coming from? Well, you know where it's likely going to be coming from. This is the stuff from Ibram Kendi. This is the stuff from Robin DiAngelo. And this is the stuff that is developed in many of the other universities, more than likely, or other institutions and large companies that teach critical race theory and whiteness and all of these divisive, really racist and non-gospel aspects of our social interactions with one with another. So we'll see where that goes. That's going to be an important one. Another one, commit to curricular changes to general education, religion, and elective courses that educate students on race, unity, and diversity. And here's the thing. I mean, why do you need to do that going into religion, for example? How front and center does this need to be in front of everybody's face all the time? That we see the world through diversity, equity, and inclusion constantly. They want to go into all of the departments and help change the curriculum so that it's focused on this divisive terminology and so that it agitates our differences, if anything. That's the way I see it. That's the way it's been effective on many other universities. Let me give you a positive one here. Promote current language in BYU's mission statement that calls for loving, genuine concern for the welfare of our neighbors. I just want to say that there are some really good things in here also. Encourage colleges and departments to adopt statements on race, equity, and belonging that can be used in college and department operations and communications. Again, how often does that go out? How often are you seeing everything about that? How often is that really about your daily campus experience or your teaching experience? Here's one on students' admission. They go through a lot of admission and recruiting of students here in this. This says, perform an independent validation study on all current admission policies, particularly the weighting systems, to evaluate whether they have a disparate impact on BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and people of color applicants. Okay, again, we see that happening already in many school districts and other universities where they're lowering certain standards because they want to help affect other areas where they may have weaker test scores, for example. That's an issue. I mean, we need to talk about that a lot more. Is that the answer for equity? Or do we have a process somehow of helping those individuals through high school, for example, to develop the skills necessary to reach those levels of testing so that they can be admitted to BYU? Certainly, I would love to see a more diverse crowd at BYU. That would be nice. I don't think that forced equity is the answer to that. They go on to say they even want a race-conscious admissions model with legal parameters on bringing people into the student body. I do like this one. Create enriched environment scholarships honoring early BIPOC members of the church, such as Jane Manning, Elijah Abel, and others. That sounds important to me. I like that. This one I do not like. This is about safe spaces. This should not be necessary. This is just such a bizarre university phenomenon here. Establish a dedicated, visible space on campus for underrepresented students and those who serve this population. Such a space will foster community and promote belonging. That's bizarre to me. That is segregation. It's following in the footsteps of what is happening on a lot of university campuses today, and I think it's damaging. I think it's dangerous. If you want to have some kind of a class or something, or where people can go if they feel they need to, great. But to dedicate a visible, separate space for people of color, that goes against everything, at least that the new mission statement of the Office of Belonging says. All right, so you can see that a number of these things could be problematic. It's very possible. My trust at this point is in Elder Holland and in the Board of Trustees. It seems very obvious to me that they have scrubbed this quite a bit. And we will all be able to see what happens with this office and how it actually operates going forward. And then finally, they wanted to have a standing committee. I'm guessing they're still going to have that, a standing committee that is brought in from several different, perhaps departments, administration, faculty, etc., and that would continuously monitor and assess issues related to race, equity, and belonging in all BYU organizational units. Does that include boards? Processes, policies, practices, procedures, and operations. So nice little thing in there that the committee would basically, everything would filter through the Office of Belonging. And that's really the concern, right? Is how political is this office going to be? How much power is it going to be given? And can it keep itself outside of the academy and strictly to the mission of BYU? That is, again, that's another tightrope that is going to need to be walked. President Worthen also said this, that the Office of Belonging will not only be core to BYU's efforts to root out racism, this is a charge from President Nelson, but also to combat prejudice of any kind, including that based on race, ethnicity, nationality, tribe, gender, age, disability, socioeconomic status, religious belief, and sexual orientation. which I think is great. Those things all should be included there. And that is very different from what the report put out, which was almost exclusively on race. The question is, does this become the new honor code office? Right? Because it could become the same thing very easily. However, at this point, I feel very optimistic about it. Little trepidation, but I'm optimistic about the steps forward that they are making. Like I said, I think that Elder Holland and the Board of Trustees have taken a very close look at this. They've prayed about this. They're trying to make the very best decision on putting something in place that makes sense, that is congruent with the gospel of Jesus Christ, the mission of BYU, and with our primary identity as children of God. I'll talk to you next time.